The Wild West. 1847, a land of nothing but dust, blood, and suspicion. The sun had just crested over the blazing red ridge at the horizon, casting its searing light down on the ranch of Jack Dusty McGraw, a 40-year-old man living alone on a stretch of land over 200 acres wide. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the rustle of withered blades and the creak of an old wooden wagon axle. It seemed like just another morning until he saw the blood trail. Not animal blood. Dusty knew that the moment he crouched down to check. Deer blood was thinner, cow blood spread wider, but this was human blood, dark, thick, dripping step by step, from the front gate all the way to the well. His hand clenched around the old Winchester rifle, and his gut twisted like a rope tightening around his belly. With 12 years on this land, Dusty knew there were only two reasons for human blood to hit his soil. Either someone had been killed nearby, or someone was running, bleeding, and didn't want to be found. Either way, both could get a man killed just for knowing too much. He moved slowly, each footstep hitting the dry earth like a drumbeat in his chest. The wind stopped. The birds fell silent. The air grew so thick it felt like you could cut it with a knife. He rounded the corner of the barn, rifle raised out of instinct, but instead of a thief or a killer, what appeared before him froze his whole body in place, against the stone wall by the well. A native man lay curled up, clutching his side where blood kept pouring out. His right hand stretched up, trying to reach the wooden bucket swaying just inches above his head. His eyes black, deep, and burning locked onto Dusty's. No fear, no pleading, just pure, razor-sharp alertness, like a wolf driven to the edge, a warrior. Dusty didn't need to ask. He saw it clear as day. The lean frame, sun-darkened skin, long black hair, and that worn feather strap around his left wrist, an old Apache symbol from the northern tribes. Folks in these parts didn't ask questions when they saw someone like that near their home. They just pulled the trigger, especially now, with war between white settlers and native tribes still simmering like hot coals beneath every night's silence. Then came a voice raspy, thin, like wind slipping through canyon cracks, water, just one word. But it hit Dusty like a punch to the ribs. Suddenly, the past surged back like a dust storm, the drought of '44 when he himself had collapsed by a dry creek bed. Lips cracked, throat on fire, begging for a single drop. He'd survived only because a passing stranger shared water from a worn-out canteen, and now someone else was begging for the same mercy. His hand tightened around the gun, finger resting on the trigger. That man was the enemy, a threat, certain death if anyone caught him helping. But those eyes painful, yet clear, didn't speak in words. But in instinct, I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to live. A single drop of blood fell from the native man's finger onto the stone, spreading like flame on dry paper. Dusty lowered his rifle, stepped forward slowly. He grabbed the bucket, tugged the dry rope, poured water into his hands and brought it to the stranger's mouth. He drank desperately, gulping it down like it was the last thing tethering him to life. "Lord help me," Dusty muttered. "I just signed my own death warrant." He knew if the neighbors, like that son of a gun Henry 2 miles down, found out about this, Dusty'd be hanging from a tree without trial in the West. Mercy cost the price of a bullet to the head. The warrior drank 3 full scoops before his trembling stopped, before the light returned to his eyes. That's when Dusty saw the wound. A round hole in the ribs, ringed with black powder, burned clear signs of a close-range gunshot. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution, which meant the one who shot him could be following that trail of blood straight here. Suddenly, the warrior lifted his head, his eyes, now full of awareness, locked onto Dusty's. He raised a hand, pointed to the horizon, then sliced a finger across his throat. The message needed no words. Danger's coming, and it's close. And at that exact moment came the sound of hoofbeats, faint at first, then pounding, thunderous. Dust clouds kicked up in the distance. Every instinct in Dusty screamed at once. Run! Hide him! Wipe the blood! Do something! But the blood trail was too long, too soaked, no time to cover it, and the native now, Dusty knew his name was Red Hawk, couldn't even stand. Moving him now would kill him. The hoofbeats grew louder. 5, no, 6 riders, armed, racing straight for the ranch. Dusty glanced at the rifle in his hand, then at Red Hawk now leaning against the well, eyes still blazing like fire in the midnight dark. He didn't know who was coming, didn't know what they'd do, but one thing was certain. From the moment he gave that man a drink, there was no turning back. The sound of hooves grew louder, thundering across the open field like cannon fire. Dust rose from the horizon, thick with the stench of horsehide, sweat, and gunpowder. Jack Dusty McGraw had never felt time move so fast. Each passing second was like a blade slicing down his spine. He pulled Red Hawk away from the well, arm locked tightly under the wounded warrior's shoulder, dragging him toward the back of the old barn. The root cellar, a pit once used to store potatoes during winter, was tucked behind a moldy stone wall, covered in creeping dry grass. If they could make it. Shut the lid. Just maybe. They'd survive. But Red Hawk shook his head. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where the dust clouds thickened. Then suddenly, he grabbed Dusty's wrist, gripped it tight, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was a knowing smile, the kind that said he wasn't afraid of death, the kind that said he'd been waiting for this. The hoofbeats stopped abruptly. A silence opened, bottomless and heavy. Then, boots hit the ground, the barn doors creaked, spurs jingled, they had arrived. Dusty stepped out from behind the well, rifle still in hand, barrel pointed down. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sweat, whiskey, and authority. 6 riders emerged like ghosts. Leading them was a man in a dark brown leather coat, a shining badge pinned to his left chest, Marshal Clayton Iron Hand Burke, a name feared across 3 counties for his cold demeanor and a trigger finger quicker than justice. Afternoon, McGraw, he drawled, as lazily as if he were asking to borrow some salt. But his eyes were sharp, cold like a blade drawn from snow. We're tracking blood, last trail, ends right in front of your gate. Dusty swallowed hard. His throat felt like sand and ashes. Must be mistaken. Marshal, Dusty replied, his voice oddly calm. I was fixing fence down south all morning. Didn't see a soul. Burke scanned the yard. His pale blue eyes swept from the blood trail near the well to the red dust still clinging to Dusty's boots. A smirk curled up one of those I own. This place smirks, so. Whose blood is that under your well? He asked, softly, like a schoolteacher quizzing a student. But his right hand already hovered over his holster. Dusty didn't answer right away. He knew one wrong word, and his blood would be the next stain on the ground. Behind Burke, the other 5 riders fanned out in an arc, each one armed, each one with eyes like fish hooks, waiting to snap. Then something happened that sliced through the thick air. Red Hawk spoke. His voice wasn't loud, nor was it clear, but it echoed like a sacred drumbeat in a tribal ceremony. Ancient Apache words floated on the wind like a forgotten song. Burke froze. His eyes widened. His hand recoiled from his gun as if burned by a snake. "What the hell?" he muttered, then snapped at Dusty. "Do you know who that is?" Dusty didn't respond because he wasn't sure he knew either. But the look in the other rider's eyes had changed. No more contempt, no more certainty, only fear. Red Hawk took a deep breath, though still bleeding. His voice rang strong and steady. "I am Red Hawk, son of Chief Gray Wolf, the man who signed the peace treaty with Fort Bridger last spring. And I was ambushed." A tremor ran through the posse. One rider, a young man named Billy Ray Dawson, stepped back half a pace. Burke, on the other hand, had gone pale as cold ashes. That can't be," he stammered. "Then why did you shoot me?" Red Hawk pressed, his gaze unflinching. "Why ambush my meeting with Colonel Morrison? Why dress your men as natives, kill him, and frame me?" Dusty felt the ground shift not from horses, but from truth, cold, bitter. "Morrison's dead." Burke snapped. "You killed him. You—" No, Red Hawk answered. "He was murdered by men you hired, dressed like us, speaking a few Apache phrases to fool witnesses. I was the scapegoat." Silence blanketed the scene like a burial shroud. No one moved. Even the grass stood still. Every eye turned to Burke, who now looked less like the law and more like a man on trial. Then Billy Ray spoke, martial. "You remember that shipment of rifles that went missing last month?" Burke whipped around, face draining of color. "I saw some of those guns." Billy Ray continued. "They weren't with the natives. They were with settlers, heading south." Those words hit like the first shovel in a grave. The other 4 riders exchanged looks. Something cracked in their eyes, doubt, fear, betrayal. Burke snarled. "Like a cornered beast, you're all being duped. Just a damn savage spinning lies, but no one backed him up." Red Hawk inhaled deeply, then pulled a blood-stained piece of paper from a pouch at his waist. "Colonel Morrison's letter," he said, voice low but resonant, "written before he died, with names, dates, evidence." Burke stepped back. His hand trembled, and for the first time, Dusty saw true fear in Burke's eyes. The wind swept through the gnarled oak trees, carrying dust that swirled around Dusty's ranch yard like an omen. The air was thick, taut like a fiddle string ready to snap. Red Hawk sat slumped by the well, sweat beading on his brow, blood still seeping through the hastily wrapped cloth. In his hand, Colonel Morrison's blood-soaked letter was like a spear driven into the heart of deceit. Marshal Burke stepped back half a pace, his face pale, his eyes scanning his men as if searching for a foothold. But, for the first time in years, that look no longer compelled obedience. "That letter proves nothing," Burke said hoarsely. "A wanted savage could forge anything." Red Hawk didn't respond. He simply looked at Billy Ray, the young deputy, and calmly held up the letter. "Read it," Red Hawk said, quietly but firmly. "If you still believe in justice." Billy looked at Burke, then at Red Hawk. His hand trembled slightly as he took the paper, not out of fear, but because he knew this moment would change everything. The letter was short, clear, bold handwriting. If I don't live to see tomorrow, know that it was men within our own ranks who betrayed me. They disguised themselves as natives to sabotage the treaty. I entrust the evidence to Red Hawk. Protect him. The survival of peace depends on it. Colonel Elijah Morrison. With each word. Billy's heart pounded harder, as if fire was coursing through his veins. He looked up and met Red Hawk's eyes, not seeing an enemy, but a man carrying the fate of an entire land on his shoulders. "You knew," Billy said, turning to Burke. "You knew Morrison wasn't killed by the Apache. You knew, and you still tried to kill him." Burke's jaw clenched. "You don't understand. Dawson, you're too green to grasp the price of peace. We have to control it. Hold the reins. Know who's in charge. And what exactly do you stand for?" Billy snapped. "Corruption arms dealing. Killing innocent men to protect your stake." The other 4 deputies exchanged looks, ashen-faced. The pieces began to fall into place, those missing shipments, those strange orders, those silenced voices. All of it bore Burke's fingerprints. Dusty still stood silently, gripping his rifle but not raising it. He felt like he was in the eye of a storm. Every action he'd taken, every drop of water he'd offered, had led to this awful truth. Burke drew his gun. The move was practiced lightning fast, but instead of aiming at Red Hawk, he turned it on Dusty. "You," he growled. "You brought him here. You're part of this." Dusty didn't flinch. He met Burke's eyes calm, unafraid, unyielding. "I gave a thirsty man water," he said, "and by doing so," Red Hawk added, "he saved my life, and maybe peace itself." Burke screamed and pulled the trigger, but in that instant, Billy Ray lunged forward, stepping between them, his own gun already drawn and pointed at Burke. "Drop it, Marshal." The 3 remaining deputies followed suit, guns trained on their commander. 1 second, 2, they felt like an eternity. Burke gasped for breath, still clutching his weapon, but no trust remained in the eyes around him. "You fools, you have no idea who we're up against." "It's not a who," Billy said. "It's a what. A rotten system, and you're its face." Red Hawk struggled to his feet, leaning against the well for support. His shirt soaked in sweat, but his voice still rang out. "And I'm not done. Did you think I came here alone?" From the distance, a call rode the wind. 1 horse, then 2, then 10. Everyone turned. Over the ridge, a squad of native riders appeared, silent but resolute. They moved like shadows, skin gleaming under the setting sun, spears at their sides not raised, but their presence said everything. They hadn't come to negotiate. They came to protect their own. Burke trembled. "They came. For you," Red Hawk nodded. "I sang the old song, the one that calls brothers to stand as one." A rider broke from the formation tall, gray-haired, his eagle feather braid trailing down his back. His eyes were deep as desert night. Chief Gray Wolf, and he looked straight at Burke. "You tried to kill my son," he said, voice gravelly, solid as rock, because he knew the truth. Burke stepped back. He was no longer the marshal, only a man stripped bare and broken. "No, there's no proof." Gray Wolf raised a hand. One of his warriors brought forth a leather pouch. Inside correspondence between Burke and arms dealers, names, dates, routes, money trails. Burke roared, "This is fake," Number Red Hawk said. "This is why Morrison trusted me. why I had to survive to bring the truth to the tribal council. Silence fell. Everyone knew Burke had no way out. He raised his gun toward Grey Wolf. "If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Bang! A gunshot echoed, but it wasn't Burke's. Dusty had lunged forward, slamming Burke to the ground, sending the weapon flying. Dirt and gravel exploded. Deputies swarmed in to restrain him. Burke lay still, eyes wide, gasping, and in that moment it all ended. The tension shattered by truth and the courage to act. The dust hadn't even settled when Billy Ray had already locked Marshal Burke in a firm hold. The gun had been knocked from his hand, lying useless beside a patch of dried blood. No one spoke. No one needed to. Words now felt unnecessary. Dusty remained on his knees, gripping the edge of the well, gasping for breath. His mind spun like desert wind meeting fire. Everything had happened so fast, so violently. Just a day ago, he was a rancher fixing fences. Now, he'd saved the life of a tribal chief's son, exposed a traitor, and stood between two worlds that once saw each other only as enemies. Chief Grey Wolf approached, not in haste, not in fury, but with a calm so complete it felt like even time paused to let him pass. He knelt beside Red Hawk, his weathered warrior's hand resting on his son's shoulder. His gaze lingered long on the wound. "He's still alive," he said, voice steady, like a stone dropped in a dry well. "Thanks to that man." Dusty looked up. The eyes of two men, a white rancher and an Apache chief, met. No words, no formalities, but between them, something was understood, something no centuries of hatred could erase compassion. Chief Grey Wolf stood and turned to Burke's men. Now, scattered across the yard, guns lowered. Faces soaked in sweat and remorse. "You once called my son a murderer," he said slowly. "You once pointed your guns at him, but today you witnessed the truth. Now you must decide how will you live with it." No one answered right away. They looked at one another, as if searching deep within for a reason, a way out of the guilt. They weren't just confronting Burke's sins, but their own. Years of blind orders, truth bent in the name of law and order. Billy Ray was the first to speak. "I don't believe in orders anymore," he said, raising his head. "I believe in what I see, what I hear, and what I feel in my heart." Another deputy, older, weathered from years on the trail, nodded. "We thought we were justice, but today I saw that justice doesn't have a color, only right and wrong." Chief Grey Wolf didn't smile, but his eyes softened. That's all I needed to hear. Red Hawk struggled to sit. Dusty helped him. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, but his gaze was sharp as a blade under moonlight. "I have to reach the tribal council before tomorrow's sunset," he said between breaths. "Only by delivering this letter and the evidence can the treaty be upheld." Billy Ray stepped forward. "You can't make it in your condition, but we'll take you. I will." It seemed like a small decision, but it turned the whole world on its head. A man who once pointed a gun at Red Hawk now vowed to protect him with his life. And with that, the others nodded too. No orders needed, no debate. They had made their choice. Chief Grey Wolf looked at Dusty. "You owe us nothing, but you've done something both our peoples forgot, seeing another man as human." Dusty nodded slightly, his eyes still on Red Hawk. "I didn't save him for politics or race. I saw a dying man. That's all. That's enough," Grey Wolf said. "Sometimes." The world only needs one man brave enough to begin. The air shifted, still heavy, but no longer reeking of gunpowder, no more clanging metal of hatred, just hope. Just then, a native rider approached with a crude stretcher. Red Hawk was placed upon it, Dusty walking beside him. Billy Ray and two others readied their horses. Burke and Hawkins were bound, guarded by Apache warriors. The letters, the logs, the proof exchanged hands between Grey Wolf and the deputies ready for a formal hearing. The sun began to set behind the rocky ridges, casting amber light across old rooftops and weathered wood. One day ended, but something far greater had just begun. Dusty paused, watching Red Hawk's figure fade into the distance. "I only gave him water," he murmured. Chief Grey Wolf stepped beside him, no longer just a chief, but a father, and sometimes, he said, a single drink of water is enough to save an entire land from drowning in blood. The sky darkened faster than usual, even though the sun hadn't yet dipped below the red cliffs of the western ridge. The air grew still, as if nature itself was holding its breath for something about to unfold. And then, the sound of hooves returned. But not just a few this time. This was an army. From the southern mountains, great plumes of dust rose and rolled in like an oncoming storm. Through the red haze, dozens of riders emerged in the golden light, Apache warriors with long spears, wooden shields, feathered flags, war paint streaked across their faces and bare chests, muscles taut with resolve. Tobias, no. Dusty stood frozen. He had seen small war parties before, but never this. Never an entire force ready to die for honor. At the front rode a towering warrior on a jet-black horse, a hand-carved stone-tipped spear at his side. Behind him, over 50 riders, mounted without reins, moved as one, silent, fluid, and formidable. They didn't scream. They didn't wave their weapons, but it was their silence that chilled every white man to the bone. Billy Ray swallowed hard. The other deputies tightened their grips on their weapons, but none dared to draw. Even those who once believed in the might of Marshal Burke now realized no gun could stop what was coming. This wasn't just a group of warriors. It was a people rising to defend the truth. Chief Grey Wolf raised his hand. The riders stopped, forming a wide circle around the ranch, dozens of deep. Black eyes fixed on Burke, on Hawkins, and on Dusty, as if silently asking one last question, friend or foe, though lying on a stretcher. Red Hawk lifted his head, his eyes full of emotion and pride. He didn't need to speak. The song he had sung earlier had already summoned their hearts. Burke, on the other hand, was soaked in sweat. His hands trembled like willow branches in a storm. He searched for an exit, but every path was now closed off, sealed by stairs and spears. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Desperate. You planning war. This is treason. We are the law." Chief Grey Wolf rode forward. He carried no gun. He didn't need one. Truth was his weapon. "The law dies when the man holding it is a traitor," he said calmly, in firm English. "You are not surrounded because you're the law. You're surrounded because you are a murderer." Burke pointed at Dusty. "It's him." He hid the criminal. He gave a savage water. Grey Wolf turned to Dusty. He dismounted and walked forward, stopping face to face. Then, unexpectedly, he bowed his head, not deeply, but enough for every warrior to see, a gesture of respect. "You didn't save Red Hawk out of hate. You didn't even know who he was, but you did the right thing when no one else dared to, and that makes you a brother." Burke sneered. "This savage touched your heart. Let me show you the truth." In one swift motion, he drew a hidden pistol from beneath his coat, spun like a snake shedding skin, and aimed at Grey Wolf. It all happened in a heartbeat. Red Hawk, as if he had sensed it all along, threw himself from the stretcher, blood still oozing from his side. He lunged between his father and the gun just as Burke fired. The gunshot echoed through the valley. At the same moment, Dusty hurled himself sideways, crashing into Burke. The two men hit the dirt in a tangle of limbs, snarling like beasts fighting over prey. The pistol flew into the dust. Burke screamed like a wounded bull, but Dusty pinned him, fire blazing in his eyes. He was no longer a farmer, he was a protector. The deputies rushed in. Billy Ray tackled Hawkins, wrestled him down, and tied him up. 3 others swarmed Burke, binding him like a hog, his face smeared with blood, dirt, and disgrace. Red Hawk collapsed near the well. But this time, the bleeding wasn't severe. The bullet had only grazed his shoulder, but enough to show everyone he had just saved his father again. Grey Wolf knelt beside his son. He shed no tears, but his old hands trembled, and when he turned to Dusty, his gaze wasn't just grateful, it was reverent. "Today," he said, voice loud enough for all to hear, "a white man saved our leader. A man who was raised to believe we were animals acted with more honor than anyone." Then he raised his hand and let out a cry in Apache. The warriors answered in unison, a wild, rising call that echoed like a tidal wave across the valley. Dusty didn't understand the language, but he understood the message. He had been accepted. As the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the red cliffs to the west, the entire valley bathed in an eerie, radiant glow, golden orange tinged with deep indigo, like a hand-stitched blanket from nature itself draping over a land just spared from disaster. No more gunfire. No more shouting, only heavy breathing and a sacred silence. Red Hawk lay on a stretcher, his wound carefully bandaged by an Apache healer whose eyes were as ancient as stone, though still weak. He was fully conscious, his eyes no longer dull, but burning with the fire of a winter festival. Burke and Hawkins were bound and locked inside the old barn, now a makeshift prison for the 2 men who once ruled the region through lies and bloodshed. The deputies, led by Billy Ray, recorded everything: handwritten letters, ledger books, correspondence between Burke and the arms dealers. There was no denying it now, no more escape, but what caught in Dusty's throat wasn't the victory. It was the sight of Chief Grey Wolf walking slowly toward him, flanked by Apache warriors, holding a long spear. The shaft was carved from redwood, etched with ancient patterns, adorned with black and white eagle feathers. When he stopped before Dusty, the circle of warriors bowed their heads as one. Grey Wolf didn't give a speech. He simply placed both hands on Dusty's shoulders, looked him in the eye, and spoke in Apache, deep, slow, and deliberate. Red Hawk, standing behind, translated softly. He says, "Today, you didn't just save a life, you saved a spirit, a treaty, and the trust of a people." Dusty stood silent, not because of the words, but because of the weight in the chief's eyes, the eyes of a father, a warrior, a symbol of an entire nation all focused on a man who once only knew dirt, drought, and fence posts. Grey Wolf continued, and Red Hawk translated again, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We have laws, bloodlines, history, but today you've become part of them, not by birth, by deed, by courage, The chief handed him the spear. No one in the circle spoke, but that silence echoed louder than 1,000 shouts. "This spear," Red Hawk said, "belonged to my ancestors, passed down from one warrior to the next. And from today, it belongs to you, Jack McGraw, the first white brother to be accepted into the Apache bloodline." Dusty reached out and touched the spear. His hand trembled not from fear, but because he knew one chapter of his life had ended and another had begun. The warriors stepped forward, each placing a hand over his, not in a handshake, but in a firm, quiet touch, as if transferring not just respect, but responsibility, a reminder that he was no longer just a man of the frontier, but now part of a people once seen only as enemies. Red Hawk came last, leaning on his own spear. He stood tall, his eyes ablaze. "You don't know what you've done, Dusty," he smiled. "You didn't just save me, you saved a peace. And sometimes the world changes because one man gave another a drink of water." Dusty said nothing. He only gripped Red Hawk's hand no longer as landowner and stranger, but as two men who had walked through battle together with humanity as their shield. The next morning, the Apache caravan departed, like a winding black ribbon. They moved toward the mountains carrying Red Hawk, the evidence, and a vow to bring the truth into the light. When the final dust settled, only Dusty remained, standing alone in the tall grass field, in his hand, the ancient spear, on his shoulders. A gentle wind carried the echo of the song sung the night before, the song that called warriors back from death. And he knew, from this day on, he would never be the same man again. If this story stirred your soul, if a single drink of water, a moment of mercy, showed you how one man can stop a war, then subscribe to the channel, because the frontier still holds truths buried in dust and blood. Because sometimes, peace isn't written in treaties, but in the courage to choose compassion. Hit subscribe so you won't miss the next legend born from fire, forged by honor, and carried on the wind of the Wild West.